When the leading ideologist of the 21st century neoconservative movement openly uses the term chessmate to describe the actions of his own country, it's an exceptional precedent. It's a significant signal not simply because one person said it. The fact is, those who have spent decades shaping U.S. foreign policy strategy, justifying military interventions and rationalizing conflicts, rarely admit failure. For such figures, admitting defeat is tantamount to professional disaster. If such an admission is made, it means the reality has become so obvious that it can no longer be hidden. On May 10, 2026, The Atlantic published an article with the laconic and stern title, Chessmate in Iran. Its author was Robert Kagan, one of the founders of the Project for the New American Century and the mastermind behind the 2003 invasion of Iraq. His opinions have shaped Washington's position on key military issues for many years. And it is this man who is bluntly stating, the United States is currently suffering a defeat that can neither be reversed nor overlooked. This failure is fundamentally different in nature from the events in Vietnam or Afghanistan. At the same time, Senator Mark Kelly, a Democrat and a well-known hardliner, made a public statement after a closed-door meeting at the Pentagon. He reported that American ammunition stockpiles are critically depleted and are being depleted at an alarming rate. This admission came from a man who has always advocated for a military buildup and never supported defense spending cuts. Simultaneously, events have occurred in the region's information space that official structures are silent about, but which are being actively discussed by experts. There were reports of a strike on a Qatari tanker off the coast of Qatar. Another vessel from the same country, according to the same reports, was denied passage through the Strait of Hormuz. There was also an incident in which several American F-35 fighter jets allegedly raised a distress signal over the Gulf of Oman and made an emergency landing at Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates. It is important to emphasize, the United States will never officially confirm any of these incidents. This is not just a diplomatic tactic, but a systemic feature of their military information policy. No matter how serious the damage to equipment or ships, there will be no official recognition. This is out of the question. However, Iranian sources regularly report such incidents. It's telling that when Iranian soldiers are killed during the conflict, their names are publicly published, they are celebrated as martyrs and honored. Meanwhile, when Washington claims to have struck Iranian forces, Tehran denies such losses. Analysts tend to trust Iranian reports over American denials. This isn't because Tehran always tells the truth, but because the Iranians have no structural interest in concealing their casualties. In fact, they glorify them. The Americans, on the other hand, have a vested interest in concealing any damage, a position they have consistently maintained for decades. Against this backdrop, the reaction of the U.S. president is noteworthy. He responded to Iranian proposals for a peace agreement with 2 social media posts within a single day, Mother's Day. In one of them, he wrote that he had read the response from the so-called Iranian representatives and called it completely unacceptable. This isn't the language of diplomacy, but the emotional outburst of a man backed into a corner. It's this context that must be kept in mind when reading Kagan's article. The contrast between the establishment ideologue's cold analysis and the angry denial at the very pinnacle of power speaks volumes. It's worth examining the precise events that prompted a figure of Kagan's stature to use the phrase, checkmate. In his article, he makes a confession almost unheard of in the neoconservative mainstream. He writes that it's difficult to recall a time when the United States suffered such a complete defeat, the strategic consequences of which cannot be ignored. Kagan methodically lists, Vietnam and Afghanistan were costly failures, but they did not undermine America's global position because they were located far from the main theaters of conflict. The Iraqi failure was offset by a shift in strategy. But the current standoff with Iran is of a different nature. 37 days of attacks by America and Israel have failed to overthrow the Iranian government, nor have they prompted capitulation or even minimal concessions. Despite the assassination of its leaders and the destruction of part of its military infrastructure, Iran has not surrendered. According to Kagan, Washington has only 2 options left. The first is to launch a full-scale land and naval war for regime change, followed by occupation of the country. This would entail the risk of losing warships in the disputed strait and long-term damage to the regional economy. The second option is to withdraw, accepting the current position as the least bad option available. Kagan draws a historic conclusion. If the all-powerful American Navy is unable or unwilling to open the strait, no other coalition with lesser capabilities will do so. A man who spent 40 years advocating the idea of American power as a global regulator acknowledged that this tool has ceased to work in the Strait of Hormuz against a specific adversary. Several weeks of war with a regional power have depleted American arsenals to dangerous levels. Without an urgent solution, allies in Europe and East Asia will doubt America's ability to withstand future conflicts. The global transition to a post-American world has accelerated, and the loss of dominance in the Gulf is only the first of many. The incident with the F-35 fighter jets deserves special attention. These fifth-generation aircraft are prized for their radar invisibility. They are used to penetrate protected airspace and reconnoiter hidden targets. They were likely probing the capabilities of Iranian air defenses, but the mission was thwarted. There is a precedent for Israeli aircraft of this model being detected by an unknown radar in the region. This means that the Iranian side is technically capable of detecting targets that are supposed to be invisible. Even if the details of this latest incident remain unclear, the very fact of such discussions indicates a shift in the military balance. A key date defining the real state of affairs is April 8, 2026. On this day, the first ceasefire agreement was brokered by Pakistan. Official American statements omit a key point. The initiative for the ceasefire came not from Tehran, but from Washington. While the President of the United States publicly claimed that Iran was defeated and close to capitulation, the American administration itself was asking for a pause. It was the United States and Israel that needed this respite due to a shortage of ammunition and the exhaustion of their missile defense systems. Iran, however, was ready to continue military operations. This gap between rhetoric and reality is crucial. The events of May 7 and 8 in northern Israel radically altered military calculations. On May 10, Hezbollah released a video showing small FPV drones, controlled by operators, striking an Iron Dome battery at the Jal al-Alam site. Iron Dome is considered one of the most effective air defense systems in the world. Yet, each drone costs approximately $1,000. A cheap device, easily assembled, destroys a highly sophisticated high-tech system in which enormous investments had been made. The Israeli army acknowledged the strike. Previously, experts, including former Israeli Air Defense Chief Brigadier General Ran Kochava, warned that the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems were poorly protected against such drones. In response, Israeli forces began hastily deploying fishing nets to southern Lebanon to physically intercept drones. This is a clear demonstration of the technological impasse. During the 37-day war, Hezbollah remained virtually inactive, which was a mystery. Now it becomes clear, preparations were underway for the use of asymmetrical warfare, employing the massive deployment of cheap aircraft against expensive infrastructure. If a new phase of the conflict begins, Israel will face thousands of such drones on two fronts simultaneously, and no amount of outside assistance will be able to compensate for this vulnerability. From May 13 to 15, the President of the United States will pay a two-day state visit to Beijing. This format presupposes several rounds of in-depth negotiations. It's important to note that the week before, Beijing hosted the Iranian foreign minister. In China's diplomatic hierarchy, Iran ranks first, while the American leader ranks second. This is a clear signal of Beijing's priorities. Washington's initial plan was to ask China to influence Iran to open the strait. However, this plan is unfeasible. First, prolonged sanctions against Chinese refineries processing Iranian oil are perceived by Beijing as an economic war against its interests. Second, China has invoked domestic legal mechanisms to protect countries that refuse to comply with American sanctions. Beijing has become an active defender of the anti-sanctions bloc. Third, following the admissions of Kagan and Senator Kelly, the Chinese side sees the weakness of the American position. Beijing is not accustomed to yielding to those whose resources are depleted. The main risk of this visit is a possible Israeli strike on Iran during these 2 days. This would present Washington with a fait accompli and force it to choose between supporting its ally and maintaining relations with China. In this scenario, the meeting would be disrupted, and the United States would find itself diplomatically isolated in Asia. What's happening in the region can be described as a change in the fundamental rules of the game. Iran has bundled the issues of Lebanon, Gaza, and Palestine into a single diplomatic package, ruling out the possibility of separate agreements. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have officially denied the Americans access to their airspace. The Gulf Cooperation Council is divided. The Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia are acting in opposite directions. Bahrain and Jordan are in an extremely unstable position. The era when a single power could dictate terms in the region through military force and financial pressure is ending. This is confirmed by physical reality. Who controls the straits, the skies, and the oil trade? Those who recognize this shift are preparing for a new reality. Experts highlight several predictions. First, the window for a new military strike by the US and Israel will close by the end of May. The next 2 or 3 weeks will be critical. Second, if the war enters a new phase, the Iranian response will be much more powerful, and the region will erupt on multiple fronts. Third, the Iranian command believes that a ground invasion would inflict a definitive defeat on US forces, ending the possibility of attacks on Iran for decades to come. Finally, Iranian society has consolidated. External pressure and the war have rallied the population around the state, depriving Washington of the opportunity to exploit internal divisions. When the chief architect of policy acknowledges checkmate, it means the position in the game has already been determined. All subsequent steps are merely a movement within the framework of the existing consequences.